많이 합니다. 예전에는 뭔가 계속 자신을 기록한다는 점 같은 걸 굉장히 중요시 생각했는데 지금은 오히려 세계의 어떤 사물이든 뭐 순간이든 사람이든 그러니까 의미를 부여해서 좀 더 나만의 진실을 만드는 그런 느낌이 저한테는 중요해진 것 같아요. 제 롤모델이 있는데 비슬라바 심보르스카라는 시인이 있거든요. 근데 그분의 사진 한 장이 있는데 굉장히 kop슬머리에 시가를 이렇게 딱 물고 커피를 마시는 그런 장면이 있었어요. 그래서 저는 너무 멋있는 거예요. 그래서 저렇게 멋진 할머니 시인이 되어야 되겠다 그런 생각을 했었습니다.
President Lee Jae-myung continued his G7 summit schedule in France on Wednesday, calling for greater international cooperation and balanced solutions to address the key global challenges. The U.S. is reportedly prepared to grant Iran sweeping economic incentives under a proposed peace agreement, including immediate access to global oil markets and participation in a $300 billion development fund, though key provisions remain subject to further negotiations. South Korea's defense ministry announced a plan Wednesday to relax access controls in border areas near North Korea, a move aimed at boosting civilian activity and revitalizing local communities. Over in France, President Lee Jae-myung attended the second session of this year's G7 summit, where he is expected to share a detailed vision to address global imbalances. Our Yoon Jung-min is part of the traveling press corps and follows this report from Geneva.
Session 2 of this year's G7 summit focuses on addressing major global imbalances. President Lee Jae-myung, who's been invited to the expanded talks, plans to highlight the need to resolve global imbalances in a harmonious, coordinated manner rather than confrontation. He is also expected to discuss with his foreign counterparts systematic, longer-term response measures to address vulnerability in energy security in East Asia, recently revealed in the course of the conflict in the Middle East. The South Korean president will also introduce his efforts to strengthen critical mineral supply chains. In the following working lunch, AI innovation will take up the key topic. World leaders are in the French town of Evian-les-Bains this week, which sits on the southern shore of Lake Geneva, for the gathering of the world's most influential powers.
How are you, Mr. President? I'm so happy.
Session 1 on Tuesday addressed reforming the current international development cooperation system, aiming to reduce financial dependency on external assistance. In line with that, the South Korean president stressed the importance of private capital, introducing a recent case where South Korea helped Indonesia secure private investment worth $50 million through its financial assistance in the agriculture and energy sectors. President Lee pitched his vision for a global AI basic society where the fruits of AI technology are shared with all countries, and he also brought up the need to bolster vocational training in developing nations. With this, the South Korean president concludes his 10-day-long trip to Europe. Blue House officials say it signals the administration's fully fledged diplomacy with the bloc as Korea enhances its role in the face of a fast-changing global order. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Geneva.
A major diplomatic breakthrough may be on the horizon over in the Middle East. Bloomberg has obtained what it says is a draft 14-point MOU between the U.S. and Iran. Now, the deal aims to end the war permanently and pave the way for long-term nuclear negotiations. Our Park Jun-han has the latest.
The path toward ending the conflict between Washington and Tehran is taking concrete shape. A report containing the draft Memorandum of Understanding obtained by Bloomberg revealed on Wednesday that both nations were set to formally sign an agreement on Friday in Switzerland. The document establishes an immediate and permanent end to the war on all fronts, explicitly including the volatile Lebanon front. Under the terms, the United States will lift its naval blockade, allowing commercial traffic in the Strait of Hormuz to return to pre-war levels within 30 days. In return, Iran will clear technical obstacles and mines to guarantee free navigation. Washington has agreed to issue immediate treasury waivers for Iranian crude oil and petrochemical exports, while negotiations for a final treaty take place over the next 60 days. To unlock these benefits, Tehran must make strict nuclear concessions. Iran is required to completely freeze its nuclear program during the 60-day negotiation window and explicitly commit to never producing nuclear weapons. The sensitive issue of its existing enriched uranium stockpile will be left for the final agreement. If Tehran follows through, the economic incentive is massive. The draft claims the U.S. and its allies plan to secure at least $300 billion for Iran's economic recovery, alongside the gradual release of billions in frozen international assets. While the draft sets a clear timeline, actual implementation will be a different story. Achieving a final agreement will require coordination with regional allies and approval through the United Nations Security Council and the Board of Governors of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
While Washington and Tehran prepare to formalize their peace framework in Switzerland this Friday, renewed Israeli strikes on Hezbollah positions in Lebanon are casting doubt on the prospects for a lasting regional stability. Our Shin So-eun has this report.
Following the electronic signing of an interim agreement, the United States and Iran will formally sign their Armistice Memorandum of Understanding in Bürgenstock, Switzerland on Friday. According to Swiss authorities, the venue was moved from Geneva to the secluded Alpine location with the mountain resort overlooking Lake Lucerne in central Switzerland. The new location comes at the request of the U.S., Iran, and the Middle East mediators to offer tighter securities and protection. Regarding the release of the agreement, President Donald Trump says it will be made public within a couple of days and that he plans to submit the document to Congress for review. But administration officials say the delay is deliberate.
So there are some diplomatic protocols, Sean. There are some sequencing that the Pakistanis have been involved in this, the Qataris have been involved in this, and what the president has said is the agreement will come out on Friday. He may decide to release the agreement sooner than that, but we have this formal ceremony on Friday, and that's when the president right now wants to release the memorandum.
Despite efforts to finalize a peace deal in Lebanon, where a ceasefire remains one of Tehran's key demands, violence has yet to be halted. Israeli drone strike killed at least 4 people on Tuesday as clashes between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah militia continued. In response, Trump publicly rebuked and urged Israel to scale back its military campaign against Hezbollah. Accusing Israeli strikes on Beirut of jeopardizing his peace efforts with Tehran, Trump added that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should show greater restraint and responsibility with Lebanon. The continued fighting in Lebanon has become a growing source of tension between the two leaders, with Iran making a ceasefire there a key condition of the broader peace agreement. Shin So-eun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has voiced confidence that the war in Ukraine can also be resolved, pointing to recent diplomatic gains in the Middle East. Lee Seung-ja has the details.
President Donald Trump said Tuesday that he wants to turn his attention to ending the war in Ukraine after reaching a framework agreement with Iran, and told reporters that the Middle East issue will soon be in the rear-view mirror. Speaking on the sidelines of the Group of Seven summit in France, Trump said he had a very good meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and planned to meet him again later in the day. Trump said he would do whatever he could to help bring an end to the conflict and urged Russia to negotiate a settlement. The U.S. leader noted that both Russia and Ukraine have suffered heavy losses during the war and stressed that a deal should be reached as soon as possible.
Look, Russia should make a deal. Russia's lost tremendous amounts of people, and so has Ukraine. Last month, they lost 35,000 soldiers between the two of them.
Ukraine continues to demonstrate its ability to strike targets deep inside Russia, using drones and missiles to put growing pressure on the Kremlin, while Moscow has vowed to carry out what it calls systematic attacks on Ukraine. Early Monday, Russian forces launched a series of deadly attacks on Kyiv, including an attack that set fire to a historic monastery. Despite the ongoing challenges, Trump struck an optimistic tone, saying he had productive conversations with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Zelensky ahead of the summit. He added that there may now be an opportunity to make progress toward ending the war as diplomatic efforts gain renewed attention from world leaders gathered at the G7. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A former White House official under President Donald Trump says South Korea and the U.S. should strengthen civilian nuclear cooperation in response to evolving geopolitical challenges. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young tells us more.
Washington shouldn't waste any time in strengthening its energy security and industrial base by expanding civil nuclear cooperation with Korea, a trusted ally. That's according to Vice Chair of America First Policy Institute Fred Fleitz, who says Seoul has earned broader rights to develop peaceful nuclear technology.
President Trump decided it was time to modernize this relationship. We're not there yet in terms of giving South Korea access to the full nuclear fuel cycle, but obviously we're moving in that direction. I think it's a good development.
His comments come as Seoul and Washington this month held their first round of negotiations on Korea's rights to uranium enrichment, spent fuel reprocessing, and civil nuclear cooperation. Korea operates one of the world's most advanced nuclear power industries, with reactor technology exported to the UAE and selected for an $18 billion project in the Czech Republic. Meanwhile, the US is racing to rebuild domestic fuel supply chains as AI and data centers drive up demand for power, which the Electric Power Research Institute says could consume up to 9% of US electricity by 2030. However, Washington has limited capacity to produce fuel for next-generation reactors, relying on Russia for roughly one-third of its enrichment services as of 2023. Fleitz argues Korea could help address such challenges. Yet outdated restrictions stand in the way.
The Netherlands, Brazil, and Argentina can make their own nuclear fuel rods, but South Korea cannot. That makes no sense. Japan and India can reprocess spent fuel rods. Now, if we can trust India and Brazil and Argentina with the sensitive nuclear technology, obviously South Korea can be trusted.
Some non-proliferation experts have long opposed the spread of enrichment and reprocessing technologies. But Fleitz points to Korea's record of responsible nuclear stewardship.
And they don't want nuclear technology spreading to nations who may use them for weapons purposes. South Korea is clearly not one of them. It has a model record in abiding by its nuclear treaty obligations.
The former Trump advisor says deeper cooperation would benefit both countries as they seek reliable energy supplies and resilience in critical industries.
I believe that South Korean companies are on the brink of some remarkable discoveries and new innovations that will produce significant amounts of fuel at much lower cost with much less waste and will reduce the need for carbon fuel.
Korean officials say Seoul and Washington could hold a second round of negotiations as early as July. Young, Arirang News.
Korea's inflation is expected to remain elevated through year-end, with upward price pressures likely to persist into next year. Our Baek Joo-hee reports.
Korea's consumer inflation will hover around 3% in the second half of this year, according to the Bank of Korea's biannual inflation review report released on Wednesday. Core inflation is also forecast to reach the mid to high 2% range. Even looking ahead to next year, the central bank expects both headline and core inflation to continuously exceed its target stability level of 2%.
It will likely take a long time for energy supply chains to normalize to previous levels and for global oil prices to stabilize.
Taking a closer look at this year's inflation path, consumer prices started the year stable at 2%. However, the trend sharply reversed following the outbreak of the Middle East conflict, with May inflation bounding back to 3.1%. A key concern for policymakers is a lingering impact of high energy costs. The central bank notes that even if global oil prices cool, the indirect effects of high energy costs typically take about 6 months to fully fit into other manufactured goods and processed foods, and can persist for up to a year. Adding fuel to the fire is an unprecedented surge in corporate bonuses within the booming IT and semiconductor sectors.
Wage hikes also risk further intensifying upward inflationary pressures from both the cost and demand sides.
The central bank warns that when top-tier bonuses are heavily concentrated in specific industries, it elevates reference wages nationwide. This creates general wage hike pressures across other sectors, which eventually stimulates demand-side inflation by adding an extra 0.05 percentage points to consumer prices. The governor of the central bank dismissed speculations of a potential big step interest rate hike, drawing a clear line by saying it was a measure brought up only when the market conditions were tough. Baek Joo-hee, Arirang News.
The government plans to widen civilian access along the inter-Korean border by easing military controls and redesignating large portions of restricted land. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
The Defense Ministry has rolled out plans to ease civilian restricted buffer zone boundaries along the border with North Korea. The Civilian Control Line, or CCL, is a buffer zone controlling civilian access for military operations within 10 kilometers south of the military demarcation line. It is currently set at an average of 8 kilometers south of the NDL, but there have been calls for changes from inconvenienced residents. Thus, it will be reduced to an average of 6 kilometers, moving upward by an average of 2 kilometers. The adjustments will start next year and will be covered by the defense budget.
We will reinforce control measures, such as relocating CCL checkpoints and installing fences and CCTV, and gradually adjust the civilian control line starting in 2027.
Adding to the CCL plans, the ministry also aims to lift restrictions on approximately 450 square kilometers of the restricted protection zone, that is around 150 times the size of Yeouido, to allow private property development.
We will revise the designation criteria for restricted protection zones south of the MDL, currently applied uniformly even to low-importance areas, to minimize operational and management burdens while enabling regional development without compromising military operations.
The ministry will start the review process in the second half of this year. Through the adjustment of the CCL and the redefinition of restricted protection zone criteria, the total area will amount to about 240 times the size of Yeouido. Now, with more public access to military-controlled zones expected, one expert said there should be thorough measures to deal with potential problems.
Civilians and soldiers will now be mixed together. So the first issue is how to classify and control them. The second is the plan to introduce AI and other advanced technologies. Specifically, what kinds of advanced technologies, and in the case of AI, what types of AI are actually being considered.
The ministry will also remove military structures considered to have lost tactical utility from 23 locations in border regions. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Efforts are underway to list Asia's shared lacquer culture as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. Experts from 8 Asian nations have gathered here in the country to map out a joint nomination, highlighting Wonju as a key heritage site. Our culture correspondent Jung Hae-rim takes us there.
A craftsman carefully scores the bark of an onnamu or lacquer tree, and milky white sap slowly emerges. Visitors to this grove in Wonju, Gyeongsangbuk-do Province gather round as the liquid is collected into a bamboo case. Known as ochil or lacquer, this natural coating has been used for centuries across Asia to protect and beautify wood. And Wonju is home to Korea's only domestic lacquer production site. So it is here at Wonju Lacquer Culture Center where masters of various crafts demonstrate techniques passed down through generations, from refining raw sap to creating colorful artworks.
Raw lacquer is the pure sap extracted directly from the tree, used without heavy processing. Because it is harvested only here in Wonju in very limited amounts, it is extremely rare and precious. Its charm is how it enhances the wood. Once applied, it brings the natural grain to life, preserving its raw beauty.
Even after more than 40 years, it's still fascinating to watch each pattern come together piece by piece. Without that feeling, I wouldn't still be doing this. What keeps me going is persistence. And I've always felt a responsibility to carry on Korea's traditions.
This may look like thread, but it's actually paper-thin abalone shells. Under a Korean technique named 끊음질, artisans cut and place each piece into a groove and then seal it with lacquer, and every line takes absolute precision. The number of artisans is declining. Younger generations are showing less interest in inheriting the craft, and raw materials are becoming increasingly scarce. Korea and 7 other Asian countries, including China, Japan, and Vietnam, are pushing for a joint UNESCO inscription for lacquer culture, aiming to preserve the shared heritage.
I'm simply impressed by the quality and dedication of the masters you have, and the kind of investment the government is making to promote lacquer culture, not only as a national treasure, national heritage, but also a collective heritage from different countries in Asia. Wonderful effort that the Korea has put forward, and UNESCO is very much appreciating it.
Participating countries plan to conduct joint research and prepare a multinational nomination document over the next 2 years, with the goal of submitting a joint application to UNESCO in 2029. Jung Hae-rim, Arirang News, Wonju.
A leading culinary institute over in Paris says interest in Korean temple cuisine is steadily growing in France as more people there embrace plant-based, mindful approaches to eating. Our culture correspondent Park Kwon-woo files this report from the ground.
Korean temple food continues to grow in popularity, especially in France, one of the world's gastronomic capitals. At prestigious culinary school at Cordon Bleu, Paris, the centuries-old Korean tradition has been taught for a decade. And according to the school's top chef, demand is continuing to grow as more people seek healthier and more balanced diets.
People have become increasingly concerned about the health and purity of what they eat. This has led to a growing interest in temple food. Fermentation, which brings probiotics and plays an important role in a healthy, balanced diet. And temple food, in particular, gives us a very different vision of ingredients and what a balanced diet can be.
The growing global interest comes as Korea's Buddhist community is pushing to have temple food recognized as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. Riffer believes the tradition deserves the recognition.
What UNESCO has recognized in France is not simply food, but its culinary tradition. It's about families gathering around the table and sharing a moment together. Korean temple food, with its focus on balance, health, and spirituality, also deserves recognition as a heritage. It is not just food, but a living cultural tradition.
Looking ahead, Le Cordon Bleu Paris plans to deepen its cooperation with Korea's culinary community. So this year marks the 140th anniversary of diplomatic ties between Korea and France. Do you see any opportunities for deeper cooperation between the school and Korea?
Diplomacy is also culinary diplomacy and cultural exchange. This year, there will be more demonstrations on Korean temple food open to the public. We also have big premises at the very heart of Paris set to be open for workshops and demonstrations of Korean temple food.
From Paris to Seoul, the school says Korean cuisine will continue to serve as a bridge between the two countries, deepening cultural exchange and mutual understanding. 박건우, Arirang News, Paris.
The midsummer heat continues to trigger scattered showers, so you may want to keep an umbrella handy. Many inland areas nationwide are expected to see showers through early tomorrow morning. 5 to 60 millimeters of rainfall is expected, and some areas could be hit by strong gusts, lightning, and even hail. A few inland areas may see additional showers tomorrow. In terms of how much rain, 5 to 30 millimeters are expected during the afternoon. Amid the heat, this year's first heat advisory will take effect at 11 a.m. tomorrow for Gyeongsan, Yecheon, and Guni in the Gyeongsangbuk-do Province and Daegu area. So please stay hydrated and take care of your health in the heat. As for temperatures, most areas will start the day at around 20 degrees. Seoul 21 degrees, Chuncheon at 19 degrees, Daegu at 21 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 31 degrees, Daegu at 33 degrees, Busan at 28 degrees. Looking ahead, southern regions and Jeju Island are forecast to see another round of rain on Friday and Saturday. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
Set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan. The Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, VANK, and Arirang TV present the Get Korea Right project. Our goal is to provide accurate information on important keywords that come to mind when we think of Korea. Blatant errors and false claims that distort history. It's time to set the record straight, sharing the true history and culture of Korea while raising the national brand. Let's get started with Get Korea Right. Are you ready to join?
Knock knock! The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Pony Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Kebion by your side, you can become a Kebion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. Today, President Lee Jae-myung wraps up his second G7 summit since taking office, using the gathering to showcase South Korea's growing role on the global stage. Over the past 2 days, he has joined discussions on AI governance, global development, and economic security while holding a series of bilateral meetings with world leaders. He also drew attention for his exchanges with U.S. President Donald Trump, including talks on North Korea and regional security. As leaders grapple with the aftermath of the Iran conflict, the war in Ukraine, and the ongoing economic uncertainty, what has President Lee achieved at the G7 summit, and what does it tell us about South Korea's place in today's changing global order? For answers to this, we are joined in the studio by Ko Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. A very big welcome, Dr. Go.
It's good to be with you.
And also joining us online is Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start a discussion right away with, of course, the G7 summit in France. It marked Korea's second straight participation. Tell us, what is the significance of this participation this year?
Well, I definitely think it's noteworthy. President Lee, I think, said it best in a recent social media post where he said, South Korea is no longer a country that simply follows change, but one that creates change and leads the future. And in one sense, this is a very good time for Korea. And maybe because it's a bad time for the rest of the world, we have a very unstable or erratic U.S. leadership. South Korea can put itself forward as a really responsible team player, but also a valuable provider of trade, technology, and investment to the rest of the international community. That being said, Korea's repeated invitation is not unprecedented. Brazil, for example, was invited last year, also this year. India has appeared 7 times in a row. But still, South Korea is the only country from the Pacific region. And in a very real sense, when host countries invite guests to the G7, there tend to be 2 main reasons. One, it's another country that's kind of being groomed and singled out for being able to contribute something to the host and to the G7, or a country is invited in solidarity, perhaps because it's a victim of something happening. And definitely this year, UAE and Ukraine are kind of these solidarity invites. But I would say South Korea, Brazil, India are guests in that first category. Countries that are useful and being asked to do more.
Right, so it was really a chance for Korea to show its value on the global stage this time around. Now, when we look at the broader agenda, Dr. Go, the leaders discussed various issues from Ukraine, the Middle East, and AI governance as well. What kind of role can a middle power like South Korea actually play in addressing these challenges?
Well, it looks like, we often say that we live in the era of great powers between the United States and China. But in fact, the global space is big enough to leave room besides China and the United States. So then South Korea clearly has, strangely enough, has a very competitive advantage in very key critical areas at the moment, such as defense industry, advanced technology such as AI and semiconductors. Also, South Korea is a major trading power. You cannot say Korea is a major military power, but then doesn't really have a global production capability yet. But then that's not the case when it comes to trade, technology, and supply chain issues. So all the issues that you just mentioned, such as Ukraine, Middle East, and also AI, these are areas where South Korea can provide critical assistance to our European partners. For instance, when it comes to Ukraine, clearly when Italians invited South Korea to the G7 meeting, they have an eye on the potential for South Korea to assist Ukraine in the ongoing war against Russia. South Korea has a very advanced and large scale, which is very important, defense base. And the Europeans have been asking South Korea to lend a hand for a while. So there's that issue there. And then second, when it comes to the Middle East, it's all about the free passage in the Strait of Hormuz. South Korea is a major energy importer from the Middle East. And therefore, there's a very important inherent interest in South Korea to ensure there's free trade, free navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, as well as the regional stability. And lastly, when it comes to AI, South Korea is not an AI powerhouse per se, but South Korea has a very important role in sustaining the AI ecosystem, for instance, by producing advanced memories, as well as chips to be used in the data centers where AI, in fact, resides. So South Korea is a very critical player there. So these are all areas where South Korea has a very important and fundamental roles, and that's why I think South Korea has more. In fact, this is the reason why South Korea punches way above its weight class right now.
So really, there's a lot of areas to contribute from South Korea. But another closely watched moment during this trip was the meeting between President Lee and President Trump. President Lee reportedly asked President Trump to pursue a peaceful solution to the North Korea issue. So given this, past diplomatic agenda between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, how likely do you think is another summit between the two?
Well, we always circle back to the potential for a summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un. But I think chance of such an event taking place is not very high, but at the same time, probably higher than before. And I think President Trump and President Lee, they've been engaged in this game of signaling. So President Trump mentioned this issue about potential situation in the Korean Peninsula to President Lee, and their conversation only lasted 30 seconds. So it's not really time. There's not enough time for the two leaders to discuss weighty matters. But it's all about sending signals to the rest of the world, especially to North Korea. We have to remember that on the eve of the G7 summit, President Trump posted on his favorite social media channel, True Social, the picture of Kim Jong-un and himself, Trump, meeting in 2018 in the Singapore summit. And this is clearly taking place while there's we know that the negotiation between Iran and the United States wrapped up. So clearly this begets the question of what's going to happen next. And President Trump has essentially provided a hint that the next issue that President Trump might be focused on could be North Korea or could be Cuba, but then at least from the President Trump's own actions, it sounds like President Trump would like to re-engage North Korea. And this is, in fact, something that President Lee has been waiting for all this time, because President Lee, as a leader of South Korea, would very much like to jumpstart the inter-Korean dialogue again, which is not taking place because North Korea is very, very much against it. So he's been expecting President Trump to start his role of a peacemaker, while South Korea's leader would be the peacemaker. And now that President Lee seems to be again interested in discussing or engaging North Korea, I think President Lee would like to help President Trump. And if it's only the matter of Kim Jong-un responding to these offers. So if that takes place, then we'll have another cycle of North Korean diplomacy. So we have to watch out for it.
Right. So this latest post, it actually shed light so much on North Korea right now. And in fact, regarding this, the Korea-EU summit has also drawn attention. The two sides have reaffirmed that North Korea would not be recognized as a nuclear weapons state, prompting a strong backlash from Pyongyang, of course. Professor Connolly, what impact could this have on inter-Korean relations?
Well, I would say on one hand, it's not going to have a huge impact because North Korea has already been quite difficult to engage with during President Lee's administration. So all this harsh language is more typical North Korean rhetoric than a sudden change in tone. But in my opinion, this whole kind of crisis point with North Korea here over the EU ROK declaration does reflect a bit of a deeper challenge facing South Korea's diplomacy. I think when South Korea is invited to, dialogue with the EU or the G7, there's kind of a lot of demand on it to actually contribute something. And I would say in this case, the EU's approach of no compromise diplomacy with Russia and by extension, North Korea, is drastically different than South Korea's vision of engagement diplomacy with North Korea. And this EU ROK declaration kind of shows a mix of language that reflects both agendas, and it creates this kind of problem. And if you look at the document itself, paragraphs 11 and 12 are very much modeling the EU's approach to dealing with Russia. It's kind of a diplomacy by demands. Then paragraph 13 takes a somewhat softer tone, but still talks about North Korean human rights issues. And I would say this kind of inconsistent framing of it, very much at odds with South Korea's typical outreach towards North Korea, is at the root of North Korea's claims that the South calls for peace are just a mask. And I think this is the practical challenges of negotiating a joint declaration with a much bigger power when you're invited to the G7. All of it might have contributed to this
So even though there had been a joint declaration, there seems to be a little bit of a gap in perspectives. Now, along the same line, President Lee has stressed peace and dialogue with North Korea during his Vatican visit, but ruled out absorption-based unification. What does that actually mean?
Well, so what President Lee said in his meeting with the Pope at Vatican might seem pretty normal or like prosaic even, because we always discuss about potential unification with North Korea, but also only as a notional matter. I mean, there's no clearly no realistic prospect of unification between the two Koreas in the near future. But then what's interesting is that this discourse or this remark came in the background of North Korea's very explicit refusal to engage South Korea in dialogue. North Korea abandoned the concept of unification as a national policy, and North Korea declared that they have incorporated this anti-unification notion in their constitution. So, and President Lee mentioning unification in this background, in this context, is remarkable in a way. And he's doing this in the background, or like in the background, sorry, the location, which is the Vatican. Clearly, he's getting the higher moral endorsement from the Pope. So President Lee essentially injecting a moral authority to the concept of unification again, in a way, in order to revive unification notion, I would say. And I think this is, I think it's a very important move and interesting move on the part of the South Korean president. And I think this sends a message to North Korea that, of course, there's a consistency here. The South Korean government has now, I mean, all preceding South Korean administrations have declared that they want to unify with North by force. So they always about unification through peace. So in that sense, there's a consistency, but at the same time, with the added declaratory value of the papal endorsement as well, that carries a message to North Korea. And I think given the fact that President Lee already had a conversation with President Trump, which potentially could jumpstart engagement with North Korea, I think this essentially has the value of a political offensive against North Korea. North Korea will now have to answer to this, and how North Korea reacts to this, because there's an opportunity for North Korea here too, which is very tantalizing. So I think the situation has become a lot more dynamic now than just 2 months ago.
Right, so we will be looking for North Korea's reactions to that. Now, when we turn back to the G7 again, this year's meeting comes after a ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran. Professor Conley, do you think it could help strengthen Western coordination on Middle East stability and the post-war order?
Well, definitely. And I do think, though, there are a lot of serious questions surrounding the ceasefire. You know, what exactly did the U.S. and Iran agree to? Do they both have the same interpretation? I think even the suggestions of peace is enough to get the market soaring and oil prices dropping. But before ships actually start going through the Straits of Hormuz, we're going to need a lot more detail. And I think part of the G7 right now is this kind of circulating the exact details. But still, President Trump has a very bad reputation of having a very different interpretation of agreements made than the other side. And for me, the one interesting issue of concern is the plan by G7 countries to play a part in reopening the Straits of Hormuz. And Britain and France have raised the idea of using naval forces and other countries contributing some sort of military or supplies as part of a multinational effort to demine or patrol the Straits of Hormuz. And South Korea especially, you know, they signed a leader's statement back in March, then a joint statement in May with G7 and other countries kind of promoting freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz. The statement, of course, was very lopsided. It talked about the challenge to freedom of navigation, completely not mentioning the kind of illegal surprise attack being launched on Iran. So if these countries try to patrol or demine the Straits of Hormuz, Iran might be quite confrontational. So I do think that the South Korea played a good effort of keeping out of the war, but the peace may have some new unique risks for South Korean policymakers.
So this focus may now be shifting to what comes after this conflict. Now, on that note, President Trump has mentioned the possible involvement of South Korean companies on Iran's reconstruction. So with Seoul taking a cautious stance on this, what kind of diplomatic approach do you think would be appropriate for Seoul right now?
No, I think the South Korean government is taking a cautious approach to this, not because they don't want to engage or participate in the construction of Iranian infrastructure in case of more of a peace agreement is reached between the two parties. It's more about the fact that whether the current MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, will lead to a stable peace in 2 months' time from now. So we have to remember that the South Korean government, as well as the South Korean private sector, have long been interested in getting back to the Iranian market. Iran is a huge country. It's a country of 93 million people. So if we go back 10 years ago, when President Obama then signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran to engage Iran in denuclearization and try to normalize relations with Iran. In fact, the South Korean president at the time, President Park Geun-hye, which actually comes from a very different part of the political spectrum than President Lee, was one of the first leaders to visit Iran. And one of the aims to normalize relations with Iran was to allow South Korean private sector to re-enter the Iranian market. So I don't think South Korean government feels pressure by the United States to go into Iran against its will. It's actually, I think the South Korean government and South Korean companies probably consider this to be a major invitation. So I think there will be no really reservation on the part of South Korea to go back to Iran. And I think they are ready. It's just a matter of uncertainty regarding the sustainability of this agreement. And it's always possible that with President Trump and the Iranian regime to restart the conflict. So I think if we set aside that risk, I think this invitation to participate in this huge reconstruction fund of $300 billion is a major opportunity for the South Korean private sector.
So we'll really have to see how this unfolds in the coming months. Now, before we conclude our discussion tonight, Dr. Go, I would want to ask, there's a lot of things that happened. President Lee visited Europe and G7 also. So what message do you think Seoul was able to deliver through this latest trip? What's the biggest takeaway?
Well, so G7 is a multilateral diplomatic stage. South Korea, the current government's foreign policy doctrine is called the G7 Plus, or like G7 Plus, the diplomatic powerhouse. So South Korea would like to be a multilateral diplomatic powerhouse now, and they're essentially taking opportunities like this, such as the meeting in G7, G20 meeting, also the APEC. All these are multilateral diplomatic forum to raise South Korea's profile. So I think that's already been done. I think South Korea is well known around the world. I think all the major actors around the world understand the fundamental and critical role that South Korea can have in many different domains, such as technology, like multilateral diplomacy, of course, but also as in sometimes even resolving conflicts, and especially when it comes to trade. So I think that first phase of the task is done. I think South Korea's job right now is step up and deliver on its potential. So I think that's going to be the second phase of President Lee's diplomatic agenda.
Right, we will definitely be watching forward to that in the months ahead. Thank you so much for your insights, Dr. Go.
My pleasure.
And also, Professor Connolly, of course, we appreciate your time tonight.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.